Part 2. The Fifth Type. As Newland approached on the horizon, Gale could feel the weight of what he was doing in every stroke of his wings. He'd never intentionally left the land, his and every other divergent's birthplace. No one dared, with the legends echoing under the breaths of the eldest members of civilization. The multi-millennium-old creatures spoke of a group of divergents that left the land never to return, and are still surviving to this day. They also said that, at the time, there was a fifth type of divergent that had the torso of a transportarian but the legs of an avian. It was described as a hunter but lacking in physique, a protruding jaw, fangs and fur. Most divergents referred to the group of rebels as broke, for reasons he couldn't place, but he supposed he was broke now as well. However, Gale personally didn't believe in the legend, as if they left, then why didn't a single divergent come back? And, if none returned, then how would the elders know that they still live? He wondered if he would be called a rebel, if anyone knew his name back on the land. He hadn't interacted with other divergents since childhood. The unfamiliar sands he woke up on previously were drawing near. The last time he was here, he was simply trying to get home where he thought he was safer. Now he was leaving his people behind with the Emporites because he couldn't bear his own memories. Was that selfish? He didn't think so, or really care. At that question, however, he again realized that losing May represented a corner in his life. He now had no one to talk to, no one to reason and share thoughts with. For the first time on his journey, he felt alone. He decided that, for the first night, he should rest at the edge of the unharvested forest of trees that was growing on the island. There was lower and denser vegetation lurking deeper into the forest, so Gale thought it would be his best option to rest at the divide of the sands and forest. That reminded him of a time when he was just learning to fly and didn't trust himself to soar above his resourcer parents while they collected the water for his entire society. He would watch from the sands of his childhood as they'd gracefully leap out of the water and slip back in. They were backlit by the setting sun, and it was all so beautiful. Life was simpler then. He didn't understand that he was being kept at the will of greed, and yet that wasn't even the worst thing he didn't understand. He didn't know what the Empirites could give him, just to take away. Laying there that night, he was failing to fall to sleep. He kept dreaming he had heard a distant thrum of stone-like wings lumbering through the air. A rumble woke him. The sand was ripping over his back and yanking at his wings. At the opening of his eyes, light from the red sun flooded into his skull. Once he readjusted to the cloudless sky's blaze, a shockwave of adrenaline pulsed through his veins. Gale hadn't been hallucinating the night before. Facing away from him, there was the same roaring beast that killed his wife. Gale used a quick thrust of his wings to launch himself deeper into the forest to evade detection. It seemingly worked, but Gale knew he needed a refuge dearly. He periodically fearfully stole a glance at his apparent pursuer. He noticed the perfectly straight three-sided drawing that was on the shoulder of every Empirit. As the distance from the flying object furthered, he was on his way to the only place he could think could possibly help him. The property of the Brooks. Gale didn't think his situation could get any worse, with the air reverberating with the death of his spouse. However, as he approached the earthen wall that protected the house, he could hear a low, almost inaudible flickering of a noise akin to that of a fire that came from behind it. Gale sprung into the air and reached the rim of the barrier to avoid being seen by the hovering being behind him. Prepared to dive down into the protection of the ancient structure, Gale was suddenly halted by the blaze of a gargantuan flame which stood confidently in the stead of the house. It burned with such fury that it squeezed every bit of smoke out of the air. Gale realized that the object hadn't come for him, it had come for the structure. He didn't know if that made him more or less terrified. Would he have evaded capture if it had come for him? May certainly didn't. He wondered if it would eventually come for him when he was no longer just taking a prolonged flight and actively rebelling against work. When he was supposed to be back to the forest, he'd harvested from his entire adult life. Others who rebelled against the tradition were taken down into the entry point and never heard from again. He wondered if that would happen to him, if that awful machine would beat its rigid wings against the air above him. He'd never seen it before, roughly half a month prior, so he figured that it could be secret enough to evade detection from the Divergent Society. If that be the case, where did it come from then? Gale had no idea. Coming out of this train of thought, his next course of action was to wait out the burning structure to see if he could decipher why anything or anyone would want to destroy it. So Gale found a place to hide in the wall and listened for the thump to appear, or for the flame to burn out. When the flicker finally stopped, he stood up and took in his environment. He'd had some time to think, and he decided he wanted to know the truth about where he was in the world, however vast it was. There were many things that he'd found in the last few cycles that contradicted everything everyone in the land knew. There are other lands, people at one point inhabited them, and our rulers who promised to keep us safe were doing just the opposite. Then he realized something. They're murderers. He let that thought sit in his mind to boil. An unspeakable anger rose within him. He'd always thought of the Empirites as a set of objects that could give commands and decide on disputes, but just then he realized that thinking and conscious beings were capable of slaughtering others in their right mind. This utterly bewildered him, which is the point where he decided that he couldn't think about that right now, so he shrugged it off with a, maybe they don't have emotion. With that, he flew into the air to enter the ruins. On the ground where he'd been just over 10 cycles ago, he saw no house, no moss, and no engraving. He'd never seen a fire take a structure like this. However, once, when two Empirites were in a duel, small fires were flying from each connection and lavishing the side of an impoverished farmer-hunter family, which is what others called the families of the hunters who were left on the land. It ignited from the sparks, some elders called them, but was quickly extinguished from the spray of a resourcer. Yes, some resource water was wasted, but that was much less devastating than this would have been to any inhabitants. This was truly saddening to Gale. The entire building was reduced to ash. Putting aside his astonishment, Gale went searching through the ruins. After a long while of wandering through the fine grey power, he was disappointed to find nothing. He was quickly losing hope. There was no longer anywhere he could go to be safe. He couldn't afford to give up now, though. So he returned to his search, and it was fortunate that he did. Gale noticed a small, almost indistinct shine. After digging through the ash, which almost entirely covered it, he found something akin to a branch made out of the same material as Empirite skin. Connected to it was a matte, smooth surface. Gale leaned forward to reach the door-looking plate. Leaning on the knuckles off his wings, his hand gained hold on the handle, and it turned. A screech was let out as Gale strained to open the door. Inside was a cave going in both directions, lit with some form of lamp which lined the inside walls of the underground surface. Gale was terrified. The only thing that came from underground was an Empirite. He thought he found where the flying machine must come from. Gale just sat, perched above the hole. He had no clue what to do. He'd left the land to escape fear, but all he had found so far had been more fear. He needed to relax, so he slumped down onto the soft ash, but that attempt for meditation was quickly extinguished as Gale began to hear soft footsteps coming up from the hole in the ground. Contrary to his first assumption, they were not the feet of Empirites coming to slaughter him. They were much too light. He sprung into the air and dove into cover behind the wall, with little more, and now was his last hope. His eyes were trained on the hole with suspense. Then something that couldn't have eased his pounding chest more appeared. It was the head of an avian child. Gale, with his guard more at ease, pulled himself higher to see what the small creature would do next. The child continued to climb out into the open air. Gale's eyes, stuck to the exhausted, hunger-stricken face of the child, failed to notice the most striking feature of the poor creature, or more accurately, the lack of one. The child was wingless. The startling reality flowered through Gale's body once he saw. The fifth type was more than myth. The unique child, once completing his climb, looked back down into the hole where a distinctly motherly face appeared swiftly. The two creatures stood seemingly very uncomfortable under the red sun looming overhead. Both had incredibly pale flesh that seemed to barely cover their thin, hairless arms and legs. The woman looked around, and a deep sadness washed over her face. When she saw her child was intently studying her mother's face, the woman quickly feigned a smile. Gale climbed back over the wall to approach the pair. Their eyes jolted to Gale, then to his wings. The child screamed and pulled himself away from the avian. Gale was startled as well. The woman gently put her arms around her child to comfort him. She wasn't surprised to see Gale at all. In fact, she didn't seem to care about his existence in the slightest. He was drawing a blank. He had no clue what to do, so he simply stood there, gently swaying his wings. The pair seemed to just sit on the ground and converse between each other in almost silent, soft voices. "Excuse me?" Gale asked after the silence became too overwhelming. This startled the woman out of her calm, comforting state, and she let out a gasp. "You can talk?" The woman barely whispered with a tone of astonish. "Yeah, I can talk," Gale just short of yelled, piercing the silence. Jealousy of the two's loving bond was quickly beginning to boil deep in Gale. He needed to be with May again. He felt that he needed it more than the pair did and ever would. He was beginning to feel anger propagate through him and out toward the two creatures, but he restrained himself. They just stared at Gale as his chest slowly expanded and contracted. He could hear his rapid heartbeat pulse up through his shoulders and out his wings. Trying to calm himself down, Gale continued, "Who are you?" While her child still shied away behind her mother, she avoided the question in a thick accent. "Who's asking?" Gale hesitantly responded, as he realized that he needed to give to gain in this situation. "I'm Gale, and I've come for answers. Haven't we all?" That was where the three's first conversation came to an end, and Gale left to escape again from his own thoughts. Behind the wall, Gale was frustrated with himself, his situation, and the world he lived in. The sky was beginning to darken, mirroring his mood. His emotions were caught between fear of the unknown and rage towards everything he could think of. He didn't think his circumstances could get much worse, but they did, as seemingly always. He was beginning to relax from his emotional turbulence when his ears began to ache. The air was pulsing again. In extreme panic, Gale flipped over the wall and dove down into the tunnel. He looked up to see two confused faces looking down onto him, and Gale bursted up at them. "What are you doing?" Forgetting his previous contempt for them, "Get down here!" They didn't move. They just looked stunned. Gale reached up with his wings and pulled them down into safety. As he began to haul the heavy door closed, a pointed cylindrical object burst out into view above the wall. It rotated toward the door with bright red airborne fire chasing it. It lessened the distance between it and Gale so rapidly it began to look like a streak across his vision. Time seemed to slow as it approached, making it possible for Gale to nearly close the hatch before the cylinder connected with the top of it and released a concussive fiery shockwave. The impact and heat blew Gale into the floor. It knocked him so violently that it disoriented and almost blinded him. The last thing he saw before he lost consciousness was the group of blue, almost grateful eyes from mother and child. When Gale woke, he flung his body up into the air until he felt a throbbing ache bloom out from his right wing, and he fell back down onto the ground of the tunnel. He thought he must have snapped it like he did in his childhood once when learning to fly. "Lie back down and relax. We're not going anywhere." A smooth, accented voice spoke from above him. It was the mother. Fortunately, divergence healed quickly. Gale didn't think a few hours was quick to heal, but that wasn't what intrigued him about her statement. "If I'm a divergent, then what does that make you?" he inquired. She just shook her head as if he was severely concussed or just plain idiotic. He continued without a response. "Well, at least tell me why you didn't leave me for dead. We obviously aren't hetero partners, so why would you care about me?" The mother at first just responded with a confused look, but then realized. Then anger bloomed on her face, and she replied, "Well, where I come from, compassion is more than something you use to pass on your genetics." She left the empty expanse filled with silence. Gale didn't understand the meaning in that phrase completely, or why he felt offended at that statement, but he did. It was like the meaning of it sparked a door in him to be opened, and he could see she was right. but didn't want to believe it and shoved it deeper into himself to hide his brief guilt. He then realized he felt ashamed to be ashamed and was stuck in a loop of guilt until the woman spoke up again with her accent, which seemed to occasionally slip on and off, which perplexed Gale. "My name is Caitlin." Gale didn't understand why she said such a thing. It seemed she trusted him more than he trusted her, but he realized that was probably a good thing, so he decided to play his cards well and try to keep her unmerited trust in him. He said with as much normalcy in his voice as possible, "Nice to meet you, Caitlin. I'm Gale. Now may I ask you a question?" "I suppose," Gale hesitantly responded. "Why is it that you act like you've never seen another person before? What's a person?" Gale was genuinely curious now. Maybe person was the fifth divergent type. "Excuse me?" "What's a person?" he said as he was beginning to be done with this conversation, and it showed in his tone, as he gave up on his previous efforts to gain a useful ally. "No, I understood what you said, but I don't understand why. Never mind," frustrated and shaking her head. "Everyone is a person. He's a person," she said, gesturing to her child. "I'm a person, and you're a person." Gale was annoyed that he hadn't learned anything worthwhile. "Okay, but you called me a divergent earlier, and everyone but the Empirites are divergents. Why are you two down here when you should be on the land doing your job like the rest of us?" After some quick thought, "I could say the same for you." Gale was embarrassed, then ashamed to be embarrassed. He simply didn't respond and just laid there in pain. Caitlin softly spoke up after a long pause. "It's clear to me you possess some sort of contempt for me and my son, and yet you saved us from that missile. Why?" "I don't have." But he knew he did have rage toward them. Wait! Gale's heart started pounding. "You know what that thing was? I get it now." He pulled himself away from them as rapidly as he could as his panic began to grow. He couldn't believe it, or he didn't want to. "You're an Empirite." His voice shattered the air in the tunnel in realization. Empirite's skin wasn't actually their skin. It was just a casing that covered these small, fleshy bodies. "Keep it down. They might hear you," she warned angrily as she pointed up. "Who? Your other Empirate friends who've come to take the last of me?" Seeing his fear boil beneath his skin, she soothed. "I don't know what an Empirite is, but it's clear that they've oppressed you, and I will not do that." He could tell she was lying about some part of that. "But you did." He was forcing words through his clenched teeth. "Every single day one of you comes up to the land and takes more of our people to never be seen again. You use us for your own survival, and you govern us solely for your own gain. Not to mention that one of your kind murdered my wife. How dare you even imply your innocence?" "I'd never harm anyone, I promise," she begged. Disregarding her pleading, he exclaimed, "I now understand who we are forced to work for. Just some lying, ungrateful and insignificant creatures who just take the food we wear our lives away producing without any thought of a thanks." His anger was turning to sorrow. "How dare you think you're innocent?" He slumped on the walls, mind racing somewhere in between murderous rage and painful sorrow. He was rapidly losing hope in his life. Everywhere he turned was just more grief, rage, guilt, shame, and sorrow. After an indistinguishable amount of impenetrable silence, he decided he needed something else to dwell on to help his mood. After some thought, he realized that in the past several cycles he'd gained an unprecedented amount of emotion. He wanted to believe that was a good thing. His mental state couldn't afford not to believe otherwise. Gale looked up and was startled as Caitlin appeared in front of him. Her face told him she was trying to be comforting. She repeated, "I'd never harm anyone." Gale sighed. "It doesn't matter. Whether it was you or one of your people, May is still dead, the hunters are still taken, we still are exploited, and we're still kept caged on our land. But not you anymore. You're safe now." Although it wasn't true, Gale appreciated her trying to ease his negative emotion, even after he'd made his feelings toward her clear. He admired that. He thought he remembered her referring to it as compassion. "What's compassion?" "This is," and she put her arms around him. He felt himself melt. Gale was simply confused at her action and his reaction to it. He wouldn't allow himself to feel any amount of protective emotion for these horrid creatures, though, and he pushed himself away from her. This time Caitlin sighed, then she quickly rotated back behind her to see her son's small confused face, saying, "What's an empirit?" His mother didn't answer, so Gale did. "They are the ones who tell everyone what to do." "So like an arch? I suppose." Gale thought there must be some ruling class within the Empirites. Moving on from that, he decided knowing the child's name might become useful for him later. "What's your name?" "Joan," he said giddily before his mother could quiet him, who quickly followed, directed at Gale, with "You better not tell anyone." Then she scolded Joan with, "You know better than to tell people your name." "You told me yours, didn't you?" Gale remarked. She waved it away with a, "That's different." "Why?" "'Cause I don't matter like he does." Gale never heard anyone say anything like that, and yet when he looked back at Joan's face, he was reminded of when he'd seen divergent children play and he had longed to raise a child of his own. He was feeling that same regret when he looked at Joan. Gale began fantasizing about being a father when it hit him. "Where's your father, Joan?" A waterfall of sorrow rushed over his young face, and Gale regretted asking the question immediately, but then tried to push the empathy away. "The arch took him." Gale melted again, and was again angry at his reaction. Joan's eyes stared into his eyes, and he felt like he had killed some sacred part of the sweet child. "I'm so sorry." Gale pleaded before he could stop himself. He walked over to Joan and wrapped his arms around him as his mother had attempted to do to Gale. Caitlin didn't stop him. Joan began to weep, and Gale did so as well, in compassion, he thought it was called. He was beginning to care less and less that the two were empirics, and started seeing them as divergent. Caitlin joined them on the floor of the endless tunnel. Gale began to feel something he'd never felt before in his century of life as an avian. He wanted the two persons to be safe and well. He wanted to stay with them forever so he could do so. These things he thought towards May when she was still alive, but now he felt them towards beings who could give him nothing. He simply wanted them to gain as much from him as they could, while he didn't want anything in return. He simply wanted to help make them happy for no obviously logical reason. Caitlin, standing up, began to speak up. "I know you have no reason to help us, but we, as you can see now, we have nowhere to go. We stayed with you because we need someone to help us. Everyone in the city, the place we live, hates us." Gale suddenly noticed she lost her accent. "Why would you leave when you had all the resources you wanted?" Caitlin didn't answer at first. Then she hesitantly said, "We're not like the others in the city." Then she removed her upper layer of clothing to reveal a holed shirt and two bony stumps. Gale was stunned, but in a calculating voice he responded, "You were an avian." "Yes, I am. So is my husband, David, and Joan. We discovered this place 100 years ago when we left with the Brooks. Have you heard of them?" "I saw their name on the building that was blown to bits up there." He began to see a connection between the words broke and brook. "Me, David, and the rest of us built that with our bare hands, teeth, and wings. After some time we decided to search onward, and we said that if we were ever lost or in danger, we'd return to the safe haven. Then we found this tunnel. But there was a dispute. Some wanted to risk being caught by the Empirites and explore the tunnel, while others wanted to play it safe and soar the sea in search for more islands, as they were called in ancient times. Me and David decided to take the chance and explore the tunnels. That was a mistake. We arrived in the city inhabited by humans, as they called themselves. At first we were simply welcomed with strange looks and curious children's eyes, but then we were taken into custody. The only way us avians escaped was by severing our wings. No other divergent could pass as a human. Me and David were the only survivors, but when we came back to the city's entrance to the tunnel, it was sealed off. So we integrated ourselves into their society. We learned their words, ways, and accents. Then one day, Joan came into our lives. It killed us to cut our child and lie to him about his world. We longed to leave the dark prison that enveloped us with all its technological conveniences. So we made a plan and started digging in a dark alley. We were trying to connect to the tunnel we're in now. One day we succeeded. We went back to our home in the city for Joan, and we were excited with the prospect of freedom. David helped me and Joan into our makeshift escape, and he was about to get in himself when lights appeared behind him, and I could see 4 enforcers running for my husband. He turned to me and said, "Go," and I did. She was beginning to sob, and that was the last I saw of him. Gale and Joan's arms were already around her, and she was weeping into Gale's chest. She continued, "I wish I could go back for him, but I can't risk hurting Joan." "Can I help save him?" "What?" she said, looking up. "All of my life I have done nothing but take and manipulate everyone for my own good. It's about time I do something for someone else for once. I don't want anything in return, but I know you and your son are deserving of my service. Now, how can I save your David?" "Okay," she began hesitantly. "Well, there is a building in the middle of the complex, and the Arch building. You can't miss it. It has a tube that connects to the surface and is taller than all the other buildings in the city. David will be on the roof, chained to a pole like the rest of the prisoners, although there is most likely just going to be David there. Here, take this to break him out." She gave him an angled, rigid object with 2 sharp edges that crossed when it was compressed. "That's a bolt cutter. Now you should be ready once the Arch decide it's night in the city and they shut the power off. Fortunately, Divergents have better night vision than humans, so you shouldn't be spotted by them from the ground." Gale noted the lack of gratitude for him, but he didn't care. That wasn't why he was doing this, to gain her trust or companionship. He was doing it because if no one was going to save this man's life and family, then Gale was going to. He no longer needed to be logically justified to be altruistic. He supposed he was now free from logical barriers. He felt his body rejuvenate with eagerness. "Show me the way." Gale stood gazing at the magnificent sight of the city through the entrance of the escape route Caitlin and David built. It had been covered with metal, as she called it, bars which Gale was gnawing away at with the bolt cutters. "Good luck," she chimed in after she had been silent of nervousness. Although that confused Gale, it's not like she was going out there. "What?" he responded as he didn't understand the phrase. "Never mind, it's a human thing. Anyway, thank you for doing this. I know I didn't give you enough appreciation earlier. I was so awestruck that you volunteered to save him. I just didn't know what to say. It reminds me of when I first left the land." She chuckled nervously as she began to pull the section of cage into the cave. "Don't get hurt out there, all right?" Then she put her arms around him one last time before she disappeared back into the darkness to keep Joan safe. Gale stepped out onto the impeccably smooth floor and looked up. He immediately saw the structure Caitlin had spoken of. He also saw how it connected to the surface and the entry point where the Empirics came and went from the ground. Gale grabbed the bolt cutters and silently and stealthily leaped into the air of the city and gently flapped his wings to gain altitude to evade detection from the few humans on the ground. As he gained height, he began to overlook the city. It was entirely dark except for a few points of light scurrying around on the roads. He focused his vision on them, and he suddenly realized what the hunters were used for. 4 of them traveled together, and every so often they would stop to beat a lone human who must have been breaking a law somehow. He remembered Caitlin mentioning enforcers. He figured that meant enforcers of law, but he didn't realize that Empirites, or humans, were using hunters for that job. It felt a little barbaric to Gale, but then one of them pointed up at him. After they seemed to discuss his motives, they ran into the Arch building. He focused on the task at hand and was beginning to be able to see figures atop the central structure. He strained to pull himself through the air faster, and he was quickly getting closer and closer to the prisoners. He thought he'd make it in time, but then the hunters burst out onto the top, teeth snarling toward him. Gale dove onto them with no fear in his system. He pivoted his wings and used them to vault himself off the ground into one of the hunters. While that one was still falling, Gale, fueled by determination and anger, whistled the bolt cutter through the air and across the second fanged creature. He'd subdued 2 of them, 2 more left. Gale used his momentum to continue rotating and set the trajectory of his wing to connect with the 3rd and largest attacker. But then the last hunter jumped off all 4s, jaws frothing, and sank his fangs into Gale's other wing. His weight was set off balance and he was thrown to the roof and pinned. The fourth hunter released his bite on Gale's wing, but moved to digging his knees into his wings and began strangling Gale. The hunter that looked like the leader appeared in Gale's view. As he was rapidly losing consciousness, Gale recognized the face of the fanged beast looming over him. It was his brother. Gale was struggling to force words through his quickly contracting throat, and his vision was beginning to redden, then darken. Then, right before Gale gave in to unconsciousness and therefore death, the knuckle of some avian's wing bashed into the heads of the two remaining attackers. Gale was freed of the clawed grip and gasped for air when he heard an incredibly familiar voice. "Get up! The others will be waking up soon!" It was May. The one divergent Gale longed to be with again, the one he wept over, the one who, through disappearing, set his life on a whole new kilter. But he couldn't think about that at the moment. Alerts were beginning to blare from what seemed to be inside his skull. Gale stood up to see his undead wife staring at him. "No time for a reunion. Let's go." "Wait! I'd promised I'd save him." After looking at the mutilated avian, she picked up the bolt cutters from the chains she must have just freed herself from and hustled over to where David was chained weakly with his stubbed wings twitching. Once he was split free, May called over to Gale. "Come over here and help me lift him." He ran over to her and gained hold of the nearly dead body. He spoke up. 3, 2, 1, go! The two avians strained against the air and their weakness as they slowly rose away from the roof, carrying David with their combined strength. They were almost halfway to the escape when May's flaps were slowing in frequency. Gale could see the little strength she had left draining from her eyes, so Gale started pushing harder. He could not give up now. They only had one more building to fly over and they were safe. So close. Gale looked over at his spouse. As he did so, May's head dropped out of consciousness, and Gale's time began to slow as it did for the missile. He wrapped his arms around David and May, and was rapidly losing speed as his lift was decreasing. He began to fall, but if he just slowed down in time before they touched the ground, they'd be able to make it to safety before the hunters caught them. So Gale spread his wings out to use as an air brake and was slowing their descent rapidly, but not rapidly enough. He stretched his wings out even more, and they began to feel as if he'd lose them from the relentless pounding air current. As the ground threatened to steal all of their lives, Gale strained harder and harder against the air rushing up at him. Then the floor seemed to appear out of nowhere and nearly pounded him out of awareness, but he willed himself to stay awake. He needed to stay conscious for May, David, Caitlin, and Joan. He dragged his spouse and David through the alley. The end was in sight. Gale kept telling himself why he was doing this. He had to keep himself fueled. As he slowly neared escape, his muscles yearned to liquefy and let all three of them die and leave Caitlin and Joan fatherless. He couldn't do that, so he forced his body to pull harder and make it to the end. As if things were difficult enough, Gale could hear the marching footsteps of hunters on their way to rob the three of their existence. But Gale used that to even more motivate himself. Before he knew it, the broken cage was in front of him. He lifted the limp bodies into the hole first. Then he jumped into the tunnel with the last of his energy, and the last thing he saw before he succumbed to senselessness was a group of hunters sprinting past the alleyway that they were hidden in, unaware of where the offenders were.